"Step away from the vehicle, ma'am, now." The command cut through the late afternoon air like a siren no one else could hear. Sharp, final, unquestioned. Conversations on the sidewalk thinned into silence, the low hum of traffic fading as if the entire street had leaned in to listen. Evelyn Carter's hands hovered for a brief second above the steering wheel, her fingers slightly curled, as though they hadn't yet decided whether to obey or remember. The engine ticked softly beneath the hood, heat rising in faint waves against the cooling air. A paper box sat open on the passenger seat, its lid bent back, revealing rows of homemade peach cobbler, the syrup glistening under a slant of golden light. One corner had already collapsed, the crust broken where it must have shifted during the sudden stop. Officer Daniel Hayes stood rigid beside the driver's door, one hand resting near his belt, the other gesturing firmly toward the pavement. His uniform was crisp, edges sharp, badge catching the sun in brief flashes that felt too bright for the quiet tension settling over the block. His jaw was set, not in anger, but in certainty, the kind that didn't pause to ask questions. Evelyn turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze through the open window. Her eyes were steady, dark and deep, reflecting not fear, but something older, something that had learned long ago the weight of moments like this. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, carrying just enough to reach the small crowd beginning to gather at a careful distance. No one stepped closer, but no one walked away either. A man across the street lowered his phone halfway, uncertain. A young woman paused mid-step, keys still in her hand. The world didn't stop, it narrowed. Hayes didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked briefly over the interior of the car, the worn upholstery, the neatly folded receipt on the dashboard, the box of desserts. Then back to her. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, slower this time, as if clarity required repetition. Evelyn exhaled, a quiet breath that barely moved her shoulders. She reached for the door handle, her fingers brushing against the cool metal before. Pulling it open, the hinge creaked faintly, a small, ordinary sound that felt out of place against the weight pressing down on the moment. When she stepped out, her shoes touched the pavement with care, as though she were entering a space that demanded respect. The breeze lifted the edge of her coat, carrying with it the faint scent of cinnamon and baked sugar. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded, quickly swallowed by the stillness. Hayes gestured toward the hood of the car. "Place your hands here." The metal reflected the sky in a dull sheen, clouds drifting across its surface like something just out of reach. Evelyn looked at it for a second longer than necessary, then placed her hands down, palms flat, her fingers spreading slightly against the cool surface. The contact was gentle, deliberate. Around them, the silence thickened, stretching across every watching face, every held breath. And in that quiet, something unseen began to shift, like a truth waiting just beneath the surface, not yet spoken, but already impossible to ignore. The metal of the hood held a quiet chill beneath Evelyn's palms, the kind that traveled slowly into her skin, steady and undeniable, yet she did not pull away. Her fingers rested there with a calm that felt practiced, almost deliberate, as if she had stood in moments like this before and understood that stillness carried more weight than movement. Behind her, the open car door swayed slightly with the breeze, tapping once, then settling, the soft thud echoing in the narrow silence that had taken over the block. The box of cobbler on the passenger seat shifted just enough for the scent of baked peaches and sugar to drift outward, warm and familiar, a contrast so gentle it almost did not belong in the tension surrounding her. Officer Hayes stepped closer, his boots striking the pavement with controlled precision, each step measured, his presence filling the space behind her without raising his voice. And yet the authority in his posture spoke louder than any command, license, and registration, he said, the words even, rehearsed, delivered with the certainty of someone who expected compliance without question. Evelyn did not turn her head immediately. Instead, she let the request settle, her eyes lowering briefly to the reflection on the hood where the sky moved slowly above her hands, clouds stretching thin across the fading light. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "They are in my purse, on the passenger seat." And for a moment, neither of them moved. Hayes glanced past her into the car, his gaze scanning quickly, efficiently, as if searching for something that would confirm what he already believed. A faint murmur rose from the edge of the sidewalk, barely audible, the sound of people shifting their weight, adjusting their stance, trying to understand without stepping in. A man in a delivery uniform leaned against his truck, arms folded, eyes fixed on the scene. A teenager held a phone at chest level, unsure whether to lift it higher. The air carried that strange pause where no one wanted to interrupt, but no one could ignore. Hayes reached past Evelyn, careful not to touch her, and retrieved the purse, placing it on the hood beside her hands with a firm, controlled motion. The zipper made a small, sharp sound as he opened it, the kind that seemed louder than it should have been. Inside, everything was neat, organized, folded with care, receipts aligned, a small notebook tucked into the side, a pair of reading glasses resting in a soft case. Nothing rushed, nothing hidden. Evelyn watched the reflection of his hands moving through her belongings, her expression unchanged, her breathing even, as if she had already decided that this moment would not take anything from her. Hayes flipped through the contents, his brow tightening slightly, not in confusion, but in concentration, as though he was searching for a detail that would justify the weight of his suspicion. "Where are you coming from?" he asked without looking up. "From the church on Maple Street," she answered. "I bring desserts every Wednesday." Her tone carrying no defense, only fact. The breeze shifted. Again, lifting a strand of her gray hair across her cheek before letting it fall back into place. Hayes paused, just for a fraction of a second, his hand resting on the edge of the purse, his eyes narrowing slightly. As he processed her words, and in that brief pause, something subtle changed in the air, not enough to break the tension, but enough to suggest that the moment was not as simple as it first appeared. Hayes closed the purse with a soft but deliberate motion, the zipper sealing with a sound that seemed to mark a line between assumption and something less certain. Yet his posture did not soften. Instead, he straightened, holding her driver's license between two fingers, studying it with narrowed eyes as if the card itself might contradict what stood in front of him. "Evelyn Carter," he read aloud, his voice lower now, less performative, more controlled, as though the name required a second layer of consideration. The faint hum of a passing car drifted behind them, tires rolling over asphalt, but it did not break the stillness that had settled around the scene. Evelyn's hands remained on the hood, unmoving, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, the rhythm of it visible only in the subtle rise and fall beneath her coat. The sunlight had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the pavement, stretching the figures of both of them into distorted shapes that merged and separated with each small movement. Hayes glanced back at the license, then at her again, comparing the image, the age, the details, searching for something that did not quite align with the narrative forming in his mind. 72, he said, almost to himself, as if the number carried weight he had not accounted for. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Instead, she let the silence hold, her gaze lowering briefly to the reflection of the badge near her hands, the metal glinting in the fading light. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, unhurried. "That is correct." A faint shift rippled through the small crowd, the kind of movement that came when tension stretched just enough to make people uneasy. The teenager across the street raised his phone a little higher now, not fully committed, but no longer hesitant. The man by the delivery truck adjusted his stance, leaning forward slightly, as if trying to hear something that had not yet been said. Hayes placed the license on the hood, beside the purse, aligning it carefully, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second before pulling away. "This vehicle matches a report," he said, his tone firmer again, returning to the structure that gave him control. "Same make, same color, same partial plate." The words hung in the air, precise, official, but something in the way he delivered them suggested that he was reinforcing the explanation more for himself than for her. Evelyn's eyes lifted, meeting his reflection in the curved surface of the hood, not directly, but enough to acknowledge his presence without challenging it. "Partial," she repeated softly, the word landing gently but with intention. Hayes paused, just for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly, the smallest crack in the certainty he had carried into the stop. The radio at his shoulder crackled faintly, A burst of static followed by a voice too distant to make out clearly, then silence again. He did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he remained where he was, caught between the protocol he trusted and the quiet composure of the woman in front of him. Evelyn shifted one hand slightly, not to pull away, but to ease the pressure against the metal, her fingers flexing once before settling again. The movement small but noticeable. The scent of peach and cinnamon lingered in the air, soft and persistent, threading through the tension like a memory that refused to disappear. Hayes finally reached for the radio, his fingers brushing against it. As he turned his head slightly, listening, and in that subtle turn, the dynamic shifted just enough to suggest that the moment was no longer entirely under his control. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, a burst of static cutting through the quiet before a voice pushed through, strained and hurried. Unit 12, confirm plate sequence Echo Victor 7. Then a pause, the kind that stretched longer than it should have. Correction, negative on full match. Suspect vehicle reported with damage to rear bumper. Repeat, visible damage. The words lingered in the air. Incomplete, yet heavy enough to shift the balance of the moment. Hayes did not respond. Immediately, his hand still resting against the radio, fingers curled slightly as if unsure whether to press the button or let the message settle. His eyes moved, not to Evelyn, but to the back of her car, his body turning just enough to follow the line of sight. The rear bumper sat clean under the fading light, untouched, smooth, reflecting the street behind it without distortion. A thin breeze moved past, carrying a faint rustle of leaves from somewhere down the block, and with it, a subtle change in the energy surrounding them. The crowd did not step closer, but their stillness sharpened, attention tightening like a held breath. Evelyn remained where she was, her hands still resting on the hood, her posture unchanged, but her eyes lifted slightly, not toward him directly, but toward the space ahead, as if she already understood what he was beginning to see. Hayes took a slow step back, his boots scraping lightly against the pavement. The sound small but unmistakable. He glanced once more at the license lying on the hood, then at the car, then back toward the radio clipped to his shoulder, as though searching for confirmation that would restore the certainty he had started with. None came. The sunlight dipped lower, casting a longer shadow across the street, stretching past Evelyn's hands and into the open space beyond, where it blurred against the edge of the curb. "Stay right there," he said, though the command carried less weight now, more habit than authority. Evelyn's fingers shifted slightly against the metal, easing the pressure again, her voice calm when she answered, "I have not moved." The simplicity of it landed differently this time, not as compliance, but as quiet fact. Hayes exhaled, a controlled breath that did not quite mask the hesitation forming beneath it. He reached for the purse again, then stopped, his hand hovering briefly before pulling back, as if reconsidering the need. Across the street, the teenager lowered the phone just a fraction, sensing the change, but not yet understanding it. The man by the delivery truck uncrossed his arms, straightening slightly, his attention fixed. The entire scene felt suspended, like a moment held between two outcomes, neither fully formed. Hayes finally pressed the radio button, his voice measured. "Dispatch, confirm full description again." And as he listened, the silence returned, deeper now, heavier, carrying with it the unmistakable sense that something had already begun to turn, even if no one had yet said it out loud. Dispatch responded after a short delay, the voice clearer now, more deliberate. "Unit 12, full description updated. Dark blue sedan. Rear bumper dented on left side. Temporary tag partially obscured. Last seen heading northbound." Each word landing with a precision that left less room for interpretation, and in that narrowing space, the weight of the situation shifted further. Hayes listened without interrupting, his posture tightening not in authority this time, but in recalibration, as if he were quietly adjusting the frame through which he had been viewing everything. His eyes moved once more to the back of Evelyn's car, tracing the clean line of the bumper, the intact paint, the absence of any damage that could be mistaken for the report, and for a brief moment, he said nothing. The silence that followed was different now, no longer charged with suspicion, but edged with something more fragile, something closer to doubt. Evelyn remained still, her hands resting on the hood. though her fingers had relaxed slightly, no longer pressed flat, but curved gently as if the tension beneath them had eased just enough to allow it. The breeze passed again, softer this time, lifting the faint scent of baked fruit into the air, a reminder of something ordinary continuing in the middle of something that no longer felt ordinary at all. Hayes reached down and picked up the license once more, looking at it with a different kind of focus, not searching for contradiction, but verifying what was already becoming clear. "Ms. Carter," he said, and this time the name did not sound like a formality, but a recognition, quieter, more grounded. Evelyn turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without breaking the calm line of her posture. "Yes, officer," she replied. Her voice carried no edge, no accusation, only presence. Hayes swallowed once, the movement subtle but visible, and for a fraction of a second, his gaze dropped to the pavement before lifting again. Across the street, the teenager lowered his phone fully now, his attention no longer driven by curiosity, but by the shift he could not fully explain. The man by the delivery truck took a slow step back, as if giving the moment space. Even the passing cars seemed to move more quietly, their sound muted against the unfolding realization. Hayes clipped the radio back into place, his hand lingering there briefly before falling to his side. He looked at the purse, still open on the hood, its contents undisturbed, then at the box of cobbler visible through the open car door, the broken corner catching the last of the sunlight. Something in his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to be felt, a softening that did not erase what had already happened, but acknowledged it in a way words had not yet reached. He took a small step back, creating a space where there had been none before. And in that space, the authority he had carried seemed to loosen its grip, replaced by a quieter awareness that the moment had turned, and that he was no longer standing on the side he had assumed at the beginning. For a moment, no one spoke, and the absence of words settled heavier than any command that had come before. The late afternoon light softened as a thin cloud drifted across the sun, dimming the sharp reflections on the car's hood and turning the scene into something quieter, almost muted. Evelyn slowly lifted her hands from the metal, not abruptly, but with a measured calm, as if she understood that the moment had already changed and no longer required stillness to hold it together. Her fingers left faint prints against the surface, traces of warmth that faded almost as soon as they appeared. She turned slightly, facing the street rather than the officer, her posture relaxed, shoulders at ease, her presence no longer confined to the narrow space he had created around her. The open car door creaked gently as the breeze moved through it, brushing against the edge of the box on the seat until one of the cobblers shifted again, the broken crust settling deeper into the syrup. Beneath it, the scent lingered, soft and persistent, grounding the moment in something real and human. Hayes stood a few feet away now, the distance small but meaningful, his hands resting at his sides, no longer guiding, no longer directing, just there. His gaze followed her movement, not with suspicion, but with a kind of careful attention that suggested he was trying to understand something he had not expected to question. The radio remained silent on his shoulder, the earlier urgency, replaced by a quiet that felt almost deliberate. Across the street, the onlookers began to shift, not leaving, but loosening, their bodies no longer held in the same rigid focus, as if the tension that had drawn them in was dissolving without a clear endpoint. A car passed slowly, its driver glancing over before continuing on, the world beginning to move again around the edges of the scene. Evelyn reached for the purse on the hood, closing it gently, aligning the zipper with the same care it had held before, then lifting it with both hands as if restoring a small order that had been disturbed. She placed it back inside the car, her movements unhurried, deliberate, each action carrying a quiet dignity that did not ask for acknowledgement. Hayes watched, his expression unreadable at first, then shifting slightly, the firmness in his jaw easing, his shoulders lowering just enough to be noticed. He glanced once more at the license still resting on the hood, then picked it up and held it out toward her, not with authority, but with a subtle hesitation, as if the simple act of returning it now carried more weight than taking it had before. Evelyn accepted it without looking at his hand, her eyes steady, her voice calm when she spoke. "Thank you." The words simple, unadorned, Yet they settled into the space between them with a clarity that made everything else feel unnecessary. Hayes nodded once, a small motion, almost reflexive, but it lingered, as though he understood that something had shifted beyond procedure, beyond explanation, and in the quiet that followed, there was no need to fill it, because the silence itself had already said what needed to be heard. Hayes did not step away immediately, even after the license had been returned and the space between them had widened. Instead, he lingered there, as if something unseen held him in place, something heavier than protocol and quieter than the moment itself. His eyes followed Evelyn as she adjusted the strap of her purse and reached into the car, carefully lifting the box of cobbler from the passenger seat. The lid shifted slightly, revealing the broken corner again, syrup glistening under the dimming light, and for a brief second, he seemed to notice it not as evidence or detail, but as something human, something that did not fit the version of events he had carried into the stop. The street around them had begun to breathe again, the tension loosening its grip, footsteps resuming, distant conversations picking up in low tones, but the space between them remained still, as if untouched by the return of normalcy. Evelyn closed the car door with a gentle push, the sound soft, final, and then turned fully toward him for the first time since stepping out of the vehicle. Her gaze met his directly now, steady and unguarded, not searching for anything, not demanding anything, simply present. Hayes held that look for a moment longer than he intended, and in that moment, the certainty that had defined his stance earlier seemed to recede, replaced by something more uncertain, more aware. "Ma'am," he began, the word catching slightly, not because he lacked the language, but because the meaning behind it had shifted. He paused, his breath controlled, his posture straightening not out of authority, but out of an effort to find the right place to stand within the moment. "There was a report," he said, his voice quieter now, less rigid. "I followed the description, and the explanation, though accurate, seemed incomplete as soon as it left his mouth." Evelyn listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, her hands steady as she held the box in front of her. The faint breeze moved through, again, brushing past them, carrying the scent of baked peaches and something else, something softer, like memory. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she let the silence settle, the same way she had done before, allowing the weight of what had happened to exist without rushing to resolve it. Hayes shifted slightly, his weight moving from one foot to the other, the movement small but revealing, as if he were adjusting to a ground that no longer felt as solid as it had moments ago. Across the street, the last of the onlookers began to disperse, their attention drifting back to their own lives, the moment no longer theirs to witness. A car passed, its headlights briefly catching the edge of Hayes's badge before fading again. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice calm, measured. "Descriptions can look like many things," she said, the words simple, but they carried a quiet depth that lingered. Hayes nodded slowly, the motion deliberate, acknowledging more than just her words, though he did not attempt to add anything further. The air between them remained open, no longer tight with tension, but not yet filled with resolution either. And in that space, the realization settled fully, not as a sudden shift, but as something that had been unfolding all along, now impossible to ignore. Hayes drew in a slow breath, the kind that settled deeper than the surface, and when he spoke again, the words came without the rigid edge they had carried before. "I should not have assumed," he said, each word measured, not rehearsed, but chosen with care. The admission did not rise in volume, it did not demand attention, but it landed with a quiet weight that filled the space between them more fully than any command had earlier. Evelyn watched him, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, the box of cobbler resting lightly in her hands as if it anchored her in something beyond the moment. The light had softened further now, the sky turning a muted shade of amber, stretching long reflections across the pavement and the side of her car. Hayes lowered his eyes briefly, not in avoidance, but in acknowledgement, then lifted them again, meeting hers without the shield of certainty he had carried before. "You were just going about your day," he added, the sentence simple, but it carried the shape of something larger, something he had not fully said yet. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, the movement subtle, thoughtful, as though she were weighing not his words, but the space behind them. The breeze moved once more, gentler now, brushing past them with a softness that matched the shift in the moment. "Yes," she said, her voice calm. "I was," and the simplicity of it did not accuse, did not challenge, but it held a quiet truth that did not need to be raised. Hayes nodded, slower this time, the motion deliberate, as if he were aligning himself with something he had not considered before. His hand lifted slightly, then fell back to his side, the gesture unfinished, uncertain, as though he had started to reach for a formality that no longer felt appropriate. The street around them continued to return to its rhythm, a distant door closing, footsteps fading, the low hum of a car engine moving past without pause. Yet within the space they occupied, time seemed to hold just a little longer. Evelyn shifted the box in her hands, adjusting her grip, her fingers careful around the softened edge where the crust had broken, and in that small act, there was a quiet resilience, something that remained intact despite what had been disturbed. Hayes watched it, and for a brief moment, his expression softened further, not with sympathy, but with recognition. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked, the question tentative, not offered out of duty, but from a place that had only just begun to form. Evelyn considered him, not for long, but long enough for the pause to matter. Then she shook her head gently. "You already can," she said, her voice steady, "by seeing clearly next time." And the words settled between them without force, without demand, yet they carried a quiet direction that did not need to be explained. Hayes absorbed them, his posture still, his gaze holding hers for a moment before lowering slightly in acknowledgement. And in that exchange, something closed, not abruptly, but with a quiet completeness, as though the moment had reached the point where nothing more needed to be added for it to be understood. Evelyn turned toward her car, the motion unhurried, as if the weight of the moment had already settled where it needed to, no longer asking anything of her. She opened the door with a soft pull, the hinge giving a quiet creak before the interior light flickered on, casting a warm glow across the worn seat and the edges of the box she still held. For a second, she paused, not looking back, but not rushing forward either, her reflection faintly visible in the window glass, layered over the dimming street behind her. The sky had shifted fully now into early evening, the amber fading into a deeper blue, streetlights beginning to hum to life one by one, their soft glow stretching across the pavement in long, quiet lines. She placed the box carefully on the passenger seat, adjusting it so the broken corner would not spill further, her fingers gentle, precise, restoring what she could without forcing it. Then she slid into the driver's seat, the fabric settling beneath her with a familiar softness, and for a brief moment, she rested her hands on the steering wheel without turning the key, her gaze lifting forward through the windshield. Outside, Hayes remained where he was, a few steps back from where the stop had begun, his figure outlined by the soft light of the street lamp behind him, his posture no longer rigid, but still, as if he were standing in the echo of something that had already passed. His hands rested at his sides, no longer signaling, no longer directing, simply there. He watched as the car door closed with a muted click, the sound small but final, and in that sound, there was a quiet understanding that the moment had reached its end. Evelyn turned the key, the engine coming to life with a low, steady hum, the dashboard lights flickering on in a gentle sequence, illuminating the space around her in soft tones. She checked her mirrors, not out of urgency, but out of habit, her movements smooth, practiced, untouched by what had just unfolded. The car eased forward, tires rolling slowly over the pavement, merging back into the flow of the street as if it had never been interrupted. Hayes did not move to stop her, did not raise his hand, did not speak. He simply watched as the car passed him, the faint scent of cinnamon and baked fruit trailing briefly in the air before fading into the evening. The street continued, cars moving, lights shifting, people returning to their paths, but something remained in the space where it had all happened, something quieter than memory, but deeper than silence. Hayes exhaled slowly, his breath visible for just a second in the cooling air, and his gaze dropped briefly to the ground before lifting again, not searching, not scanning, but seeing. The badge on his chest caught the light once more, but this time, it did not shine as sharply, its reflection softened by the angle, by the moment, by something that had changed without needing to be named. And as Evelyn's car disappeared down the road, blending into the rhythm of the city, the street behind her settled into stillness again, not empty, not erased, but quieter, as if it carried within it the echo of a truth that no longer needed to be spoken aloud.